everyone. My name's Michelle Marshall. In the lead up to World Poetry Day on March the 21st, I'm interviewing some of our Book Dragon poets. Today I'm joined by Chris Hart. Hello, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you
Hi.
with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, can you start by asking you, when did you first discover your gift for writing poetry, Chris?
Um, it's a strange one because as a kid, we always used to write limericks, and it was a bit of a joke. And never thought of it as poetry, never thought of it as rhyme. When I got into actually writing, I started off with small stories, and then they grew, and episodes joined together. And I found that when I was writing, I was looking for alliteration all the time. And that seemed to just trigger off a bit of rhyming. And when I was making notes, I was actually making notes in rhyme, and I couldn't believe it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was more humor. And also, if you can tell something as a limerick to a bunch of school children, they tend to take more notice of you than if you try and lecture them with a bunch of facts. So I suppose that was when it started about 15, 20 years ago. I started to think maybe this is poetry. Yeah, maybe it isn't. I don't know.
No, it definitely is. And it's a very clever device for teaching as well. So, might be a top tip there. So, which poets inspired you, Chris?
Well, as a kid, my mother was keen on Shakespeare. She can recite just about every piece of Shakespeare there was, and I loved the skill in making things rhyme. I could never do it when I was a child, but when I was about 14, I was given a couple of Spike Milligan books, and one of those was Silly Verse. And well, I've never laughed so much in all my life. I absolutely adored what he was doing. I must have read that book about 20 times, and it's dog-eared and it's on the shelf behind me, and I still read it when I can. But recently, thanks to things like the Comedy Channel, I discovered Tim Minchin a few years ago, Australian gent, and what a talent. The man is brilliant. He is just so adept at telling stories through his poetry. And he just triggered something in me, tickled me funny bone, and I just had to listen to him. So the other day I was trying to explain Storm, his poetry about having a meeting with his friends and meeting someone who really rubbed him up the wrong way. And I just thought it was hilarious. And I was very surprised to see that someone's made a little cartoon of it on YouTube. So I was watching that and showing everybody again. So at the moment, that's my favorite, but it does change. We do different things. So yeah, not traditional. I've read Milton, bit boring for me. I've read a few of the more highbrow people, like Wordsworth, and again, we all know a few of the words from there. But no, I like Tim Minchin at the moment, and of course, Spike Milligan. He'll always be there for me.
So, very clever comedy poets there.
Yeah, makes
So,
me smile just thinking about them. Yeah,
yeah, so you just laugh just thinking about remembering them.
yeah.
So, what is your favorite poem by another poet, Chris?
Probably Storm at the moment. I
Yeah.
try not to say I've got a fixed favorite because every time I see something else, I think, oh, that's fantastic. That's my favorite now. And but I keep going back to some of Leah's limericks as well, which I memorized when I was a kid. But yeah, and it's fun to be able to quote a few limericks to my children who are just turned 20, and they're not really adept in that sort of thing at all. In fact, it's strange new medium to them. So something I took for granted as a child is totally alien to them.
So, what's your favorite poem that you've written yourself? And could you recite us
Oh,
a few lines?
I don't really have a favorite. What I do is I have a couple that I'm pretty proud of.
Mhm.
There's a very famous black and white picture of two children, waif and strays, sat on stone steps in 1920s Boston. And they're in like rags, and they're about 3, 4 year old, and they're reading comics. And I did a brilliant, well, what I like to think of as a lovely interpretation of what was going on. It's 8 lines. Can I read it to you?
Yeah, I'd love you to.
Two children sitting with comics in hand, fighting mind battles in air and on land. A brash young lad, like all young males, a quiet young girl, entranced by dark tales. I'd like powers of strength, fire, and might. No, chthonic powers to set darkness alight, she said. To squash you or fry you, I'd have to decide. You'd lose to an arrow from the dark where I'd hide. I'd burn up your arrow, snatched from the air, but your mind would be open and I'd be in there. So I just thought it was. You've got all the kids who are very Marvel heroes. I want to fly. I want to be strong. I want to be doing this. I want to cast fire. And then you've got the supernatural. I want to be able to use my mind power to control you side of things. And I just thought, looking at these two kids, they were totally obviously brother and sister from the way they were dressed, the place they were doing, the actions they were doing. But I just thought they're so different, even as children. What would they be thinking? What would they be saying to one another? And that's where it came from. So that's one of the ones I really love. I love the concept of the discussion between them.
It's a lovely story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Chris. What advice would you give to anyone who's wanting to start writing poetry?
Oh, I'm the last person to ask for advice. I just sort of fell into it and my brain took over. It's not a secret. I don't think you have to rhyme. A lot of people have this thing where you have to rhyme. Mine do, yeah, fair enough. But then I think that's more my Shakespearean influence from when I was a young kid. And of course, my Lear influence with the limericks. But it doesn't. But I do think that words have to fit, they have to be like crafted. It's more about tempo and cadence. And the other thing I don't like from some of the older, more established poets is obscure words. Why? Talk about what you're trying to pass over. Poetry is drawing with words, I think. It's about making an image. It's about creating a set scene and describing it to the listeners. And when you describe that, people have to use emotion. And I think that's where poetry comes from. It's driven by the emotion of an image. We all think cute little words when we see oil paintings. We all think about whether we like or we dislike things we see on TV. And I just think poetry is what we do naturally when we see things. So if we can create that imagery, then the poem is the expression. Is that a bit too highbrow? Is that me
No, no,
second
that was
guessing it?
absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
No,
But
yeah.
someone who didn't seem to have much to say at the start, you phrased that perfectly.
Yeah, well, it's just what I do. I mean, lots of people. That's the thing with poetry. It's unique. Everybody is unique. Everybody has a different take on it. There's no hard and fast rule of what makes a good poem because it reaches out and it touches each person who hears it, and that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And if you'd like to purchase Chris's books, you can do so at the Bookdragon Bookshop at 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tees, or from our website, www.thebookdragon.co.uk. Thanks for joining us, Chris. I really enjoyed interviewing you, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon.